Mhm. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. Welcome to COP Snack Break, a webinar series bringing you to the latest research in cooperative studies. I am Camilla Carabini. I'm your host today, and I am the Young and Emerging Scholar representative within the International Cooperative Alliance Committee on Cooperative Research. This series is all about spotlighting fresh new ideas, new voices, inspiring work from young and emerging scholars around the world. It's a space to connect, learn, ask questions, and strengthen our global cooperative community. Uh, what are you snacking today? I have a coffee with me, so please grab your coffee, your empanada, your patty, whatever you want, and get ready because today I have the pleasure to introduce you to Adrian Amon, PhD candidate at the Corvinus University of Budapest. Hi, Adrian. Welcome to Cooperative Snack Break.
Hello. Uh, yeah, thank you very much for, the invitation. I'm also part of the Yes Network, right? So I think it's a quite nice format to exchange ideas and also reflect and reciprocate on them. So thank you.
So thank you. The format is quite easy. So Adrian, you will have 15 minutes to present your research project, and then our our guest here will have 15 minutes for question and answer and to debate and comment and give you feedback about what you've just been presented. So all of you, please feel free to raise your hand or write in the chat, and I will then moderate the Q&A session. Adrian, what are you snacking today?
Uh, Lacking fresh ideas, I guess, or fresh inputs from you on my
That's
ideas.
great. All
So,
right. So we are also um, live streaming right now on the YouTube channel. So welcome also to our guests that are looking and watching from YouTube. Adrian, I guess the floor is yours. You can share your presentation and you have 15 minutes.
all right, then I will share my presentation. Go like this. Can you see it? Is it visible?
Yes, Steve.
Great. All right. So yeah, thanks again for the opportunity. So I'm a PhD candidate, PhD student at Corvinus University of Budapest, and my third year of my PhD. And I'm going to talk today about institutions and identity in the dynamics of degeneration and regeneration, a Canadian perspective. So first of all, since it's the year 2025, I think we can say that, at least today we can say that it's still the year. And Antonio Guterres said that cooperatives provide solutions to many of the global challenges of our time. They drive development by promoting entrepreneurship, enable market access, and combating poverty and social exclusion. And together, cooperatives build a better world. Now, cooperatives as democratic enterprises are caught in certain tensions of the embeddedment they are in. And that is the subject of degeneration and regeneration. So today I'm going to talk about my research proposal, which I intend to carry out in Canada beginning of next year, and introduce you to the concepts of degeneration and regeneration, the method I intend to use, and the outline of my research plan. So how I'm actually going to proceed. And then I'm looking forward to your feedback and questions or critics as well, if you will. So what is degeneration? I structured it into 3 points. Fundamentally, the first point is origins and structural vulnerability. So cooperatives have historically emerged as survival strategies in marginalized contexts. So in contexts where neither the state nor the market could find a satisfactory solution to a given social or societal problem, these types of organizations, as democratic and alternative organizations, have emerged. However, there is a persistent tension through their embeddedness in a capitalistic economy which prioritizes profit making. And that is fundamentally the drivers of degeneration. So there's a conflict on the one hand between rationalization and preserving democratic governance, the character and the values of a cooperative on the other side. So external and internal forces or conditions influence the phenomenon. And there are different types of degeneration. So the degeneration on an organization or a cooperative can have different propensities. And that depends on how we see it. So for instance, organizational degeneration means that a management elite would take decision-making power and authority in the cooperative. Cultural degeneration means that the culture drifts more towards this profit rational, and constitutional degeneration would mean that cooperatives tend to operate more and more and more like conventional or capitalistic companies. So what is the state of the art? Generally and normatively, degeneration is theorized through the cooperative life cycle model. And we will look at that a little bit later. And so fundamentally, it proclaims the cooperatives undergo a life cycle of degeneration and simultaneous regeneration. And this type of influence, namely degeneration, has been observed across cooperative types. However, initially, it was seen as quite deterministic. So initially quite as deterministic. However, the inevitability of this phenomenon has been contested in recent years. Okay, so in summary, the degeneration thesis states that worker cooperatives or cooperatives in general will have to adopt the same organizational forms and priorities as capitalistic businesses in order to survive. As a result, it is argued that cooperatives will gradually become dominated by a managerial elite who will effectively take decisions in the cooperative and so undermine democracy and the influence that other workers can exert. Now, the literature is increasingly moving in the direction of regeneration. And again, here I have tried to, it's a quite complex phenomenon in general, both aspects. And I tried to narrow or break it down into digestible parts. So fundamentally, degeneration would mean a cooperative is regeneration if it enables participation, is regenerating if it enables participation across the organization, collaborative work, equal rights and responsibility, and sustained commitment to social goals. And the later part we will see in later, so sustaining commitment to social goals is really essential. There's also a part of the literature that proclaims rotating role and checks and balances. So in a way that means that, one back, in a way that means that, the same members of the cooperative are not always in the same roles, and so they cannot fundamentally accumulate expert knowledge in that way, and therefore the power will be balanced in that way. But also democracy, skill, and political consciousness are essential. So how can we actually, as agents, how can we participate appropriately in the democratic decision-making process in a cooperative, and what aspects and capabilities play a role in this? Furthermore, a strong value foundation in culture is critical. So a critically minded organizational culture and cooperative ethos. And honestly, this is not part of the degeneration literature, but recently I've been watching a speech by Matt Alverson. He's a critical management scholar, and he's talking about the functional stupidity. And I figured, so I related that recently to the degeneration and regeneration debate as well, because that concept basically describes that members question routines so rational routines that proclaim rationality in a way instead of blindly following them. Yeah. So that is, well, but that might have to be approved through further research. And also, what is very important is the value alignment between principle and practices, which is fundamentally known or generally known as decoupling, if it's not taking place. As well, the institutional environment, movement ties, and views on the cooperative model itself determine the way a regeneration can take place. So fundamentally, cultural conditions determine the perception of the cooperative model, and that also includes perceptions on degeneration and regeneration. If you just, well, I'm from Germany initially, so we Germans, well, okay, we also protest, but we certainly don't protest as much as the French do. Yeah, and I think that is, well, I hope there no French is taking offense on this, but because it's actually something good, right? So standing up for your right. And I think this also plays a role in the concept of degeneration and regeneration. So fundamentally, regeneration requires to balance competing poles, for instance, democracy and efficiency. However, recently there are also calls in the literature to focus more on the subjective and emotional dimension in the context of degeneration. And to sum it up, a recent publication proclaimed that cooperative regeneration refers to the practices and governance structure that preserve democratic member control, the equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of all members, and a sustained commitment to cooperative ideals, which are developed through a continuously reflexive process under the omnipresent threat of cooperative degeneration. Now, don't be overloaded, but this is how I imagine degeneration. This is not something that is academically confirmed, but in the beginning of my PhD journey, I wanted to understand, okay, how can I myself make sense of degeneration? And on the left side, we see there is a context, yeah, with all of its constituents. So that means regulatory environment, the institutional environment, cultural norms, stakeholder needs and expectations, but also member and identity. Uh, and there is a pressure to adapt on the cooperative sector, yeah, with the cooperative principles, with collective ownership and workplace democracy. And there is, from the system perspective, there is always a need to survive for cooperatives, right? They are also economic organizations, so they have to survive while maintaining a viable business. And that means that there's a systemic perpetration. So the system, the context is exerting some influence to the cooperatives, which makes them to comply with these requirements. And they are fundamentally perpetrating the totality of structures, the totality of organizations we have in the economy. And then we have the different aspects of regeneration that are somewhere in between. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the cooperative life cycle model recently adapted by Unterreiner. And I don't want to explain the whole model. You can look it up yourself if you have time. But fundamentally, it says that there is at the bottom, if we just look at the bottom, there is a stage 1 until stage 5. So fundamentally, each cooperative in this normative model undergoes a certain process, and then in the end they have at a certain point in time they have the decision, okay, are we regenerating for instance practices which are not so democratic anymore, governance rules that have shifted over times, or are we going more in the institutional isomorphism direction where we become fundamentally, in the extreme case, a capitalistic business, if you will, if you want to say it like that, or there's a dissolution and exit of the industry. And I think the model I showed you before, my interpretation of degeneration and regeneration, something like that must come before this model. So because this model is a normative model, so it describes the ideal or the general type of how degeneration can play out in general, but it doesn't really consider the context these cooperatives are embedded in general. So, and in my recent systematic literature review, which I'm trying to publish at the moment, I figured that there are. So I went through the literature and I documented and I analyzed in which countries degeneration studies have been conducted, and we can clearly see that in Western Europe, the majority, the bulk of these studies have been conducted, but other contexts. And that is fundamentally what I'm arguing for, is that under other contexts have not received as much attention to the phenomenon. And that's quite surprising because, also other countries have a lot of cooperatives. And yeah, so that sparked my interest in that way. So what are the research gaps that I figured? And as I said before, I wanted to study it in the Canadian context. So context is missing from most elaboration, as well as the theory. There seems to be institutionally specific preconditions to the cooperative lifecycle model, and the type of cooperative is also not specified. So different versions of this lifecycle model are addressing different types of cooperatives. So many studies in Western European countries, and there is also a need to understand the subjective and lived experience of degeneration and regeneration. And also there's a lack of phenomenological approaches and consideration of historic trajectories, right? So the historic trajectories and the way a society is perceiving a cooperative model itself, but also the threats to democracy might vary a lot dependent on the context. Now, how do I want to research that? Um, and before I overload you with this, I will fundamentally we can read it together because phenomenology is actually an interpretative approach. Yeah. So, but I want to do a critical study. So I want um, to to pay particular attention to the historic trajectories of these cooperatives and the cooperative movement they are embedded in. So fundamentally, that is what critical phenomenology is, uh, is directed at. We want to understand the meaning and the sense making, the lived experience of members of a phenomenon or members of an organization, but we also want to understand the reflexive discussion in this case. So what is the foundation? What are the historic trajectories and what are the contexts through which these meaning makings, these identities and sense makings arise from? Yeah. And through that, this is the philosophical foundation of my research plan. And assigned this is a model by Maxwell, so fundamentally research question in the middle, purpose, conceptual context, so theories, research methods, and quality criteria. So to my research questions, I want to understand how do cooperative members in Canada make sense of and interpret the organization's governance practices in relation to its democratic character? How do members construct meanings around moments of tensions and reconciliation between rationalization and democracy? In what ways do members' understanding of cooperative identity reflect and interpret the broader institutional environment of Canadian cooperativism? Yeah, that's but you might as well say that it's a quite challenging endeavor I'm on, but I would like to try to find the answers to these questions. Yeah. And yeah, I think since I'm running short on time, the purposes have fundamentally, I think, already been described. So I think it's very interesting to study these organizations in a specific context and also how the, how the identity of members, which arises from the context, define how degeneration and regeneration play out through, and I want to interpret that through institutional theory, through degeneration and regeneration literature, but also paradox theory and identity of work. So the research methods definitely fundamentally are consistent of semi-structured interviews, document analysis, and observation, if applicable. And yeah, that is actually not so interesting, I guess, here. So yeah, and fundamentally, I defined an outline. So I'm starting in January 2026 until March 2026 with case identification and acquisition. So there are certain selection criteria I will take into consideration. And yeah, I need to identify suitable worker-owned cooperatives because this study is particularly on worker-owned cooperatives, which are different from agricultural or housing cooperatives or also consumer cooperatives. Then I will proceed with document analysis. So fundamentally, I hope that they can provide me some sort of statutes or regulatory documents, the cooperatives themselves, but also publicly available data like website news on the cooperatives. I will go through because this phase really serves the refinement of the research question and enhancement of my contextual understanding. Then I will fundamentally carry out the field work, and at the moment I set it at 30 interviews across 4 to 5 cooperatives, and yeah, I hope I will end up. I mean, I should end up with a draft paper, a conference paper, and a preliminary manuscript, which I will then work on in the subsequent months. And that's it. So perhaps one important note is that I would like to, so a tangible tangible outcome of the research should be a model for sense making. Yeah, how do cooperative members make sense of the concepts of degeneration and regeneration? And this should optimally result in some sort of taxonomy, which yeah, some graspable model in the end. And yeah, thank you for your attention. And as I said, so questions, remarks, and criticism, as in a cooperative, yeah, they are more than welcome and equally welcome. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Adrian. Well done. It's been very interesting. I have a couple of questions, but I will give the floor first to our guest. So, Tabo has raised a hand. Let me just say that we have a question from a YouTube uh, observer. He asked if you could potentially provide some literature recommendation on this at the end of the session.
Sure, absolutely.
Maybe we can share
Uh,
your email or
yeah, absolutely. I think that would probably be the best to share my email. Yeah, I can. It's just yeah, I included the excerpts from my manuscript with the short names and citations, but not the literature. Yeah, but I can do that. Yeah.
or just reach out to the Yes Network by looking at the ccr.ica.coop website, and we will put you in contact with Adrian. Tabo, please go on.
Yes, thank you very much, Adrian. I find your project extremely interesting and valuable. I think one of the most valuable things is that you are looking, because there are all these theories of degeneration, regeneration, and stuff. But as you say, like you're interested in kind of the concrete contextual mechanisms. I think this is really the strength that at least I'm most interested in. It's like when they say like, oh, everyone has become neoliberal. Well, what does it mean, right? Like, what are the concrete causal mechanisms of how as you say, like the interpretative lens or whatever of the members change? What I love also about you saying that this is basically not a completely interpretivist approach, where you say like you want some reflection in there. In my own research, I found it really, really helpful to get this reflection through focus groups, because there, when you write questions in a specific way, you can get a discussion going among workers, and get them in that way to be more creative and more critical, and also maybe even change their mind. I think what I found really helpful there is participatory research, like literature, methodological literature on participatory research and action research, stuff like this. The only thing there for me, I found it extremely, extremely important to see that the sequencing of the methods is right, because they will only be critical and reflect with you if you are actually if you kind of know them and are already friendly with them, right? So these are all my praises and yeah, notes on that. Thank you very much, Adrian.
Thank you, Tabo. Yeah, absolutely, and that is it's true. So I really want to do observations in a way, because and also action research. It goes more into an ethnographic direction, I would say. But so I hope I won't run into language barriers, because I learned a little bit of French and but not that much. And in Quebec, they usually speak French. But of course, usually Canadians are bilingual. So let's see. But I'll definitely take that with me. Thank you very much. It's a good point.
Yes, Bharat, please go on.
Thanks, Dr. Kevin. Yeah, no, it's certainly no. Great presentation, Adrian. I totally echo Tabo in terms of no. Yeah, this is a very interesting research proposal. No, I'm based here in Canada, and no, and I mean, I'm not a researcher, but then as a cooperative volunteer enthusiast, I see that. I think, as you mentioned, Adrian, this is like very much understudied. There's hardly anything actually, available in terms of what is like the like sort of the situation of say cooperative research here in Canada. Now, with respect to that, I just one very quick question I just wanted to ask you about. It's about the sampling itself. See, see, I mean, of course, Quebec is really if like the most happening place in terms of cooperatives in Canada. It's like, way beyond like other provinces with a lot of those like government support to cooperatives and so on. With respect to that, I mean, no, in terms of the other places, like for example, Ontario, or if you go westwards, all the way to BC, is any plans of also say talking to worker cooperatives in those parts was the question that I had, Adrian.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and thanks for the question. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think so. I read that Canada has 2/3 of all Quebec has 2/3 of all worker cooperatives in Canada. So it's a really huge ecosystem. And I do indeed already have some contacts I can reach out to with regard to other cooperatives in Canada. However, like this is the sampling is very important, and I think this is definitely the next step because I also have to get an ethics approval and stuff like that. So the sampling will be more specified. Um, but I do intend to. I just the implications of reaching out to cooperatives in other parts of Canada, however, might be far-reaching because, the Quebecian province is some sort of, not, I don't want to say isle, and certainly Canadians can describe it better, but they have not a fundamentally different philosophy than the rest of Canada, but they are something standalone, right? They speak French, and so I can imagine that the historic ties and the movements they are embedded in, the general philosophy of these cooperatives in the ecosystem might differ to some extent from the other Canadians because cooperatives in the proximity of the US might have a different historical origin, right? So, but honestly, I'm not far enough to answer this question completely, but it's a very good point. Thank you.
Well, if I may, I have a comment. As an anthropologist, I very like and appreciate your methodological approach, even if I strongly believe that ethnographic participant observation could really enhance the study. But if you don't have the chance to do that, I believe that documents like meetings, minutes, or even recording of members' meetings and newsletter or their chat that they have among them, if you could get those documents as well as a way to reflect not just the interviews, because sometimes we know that what people answer when they are posed in an interview is not really what they do necessarily. So it's interesting to compare with those kind of documents if you get the chance.
Definitely. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, I definitely want to include ethnographic elements or observations in meetings. I just don't know how well that is possible. So I don't know, because maybe many cooperatives are conducting their meetings in French, and then so either perhaps I have a co-author or I won't be able to make sense of what they are saying, right? So, but that is a very good tip. Meeting minutes, yeah. Perhaps because even if the meeting is in French, they could perhaps translate it in a way. But
Or you can translate a minute.
yeah, yeah,
In
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's good. Because I really need, I want to, and that's also why ethnography might be very, well, helpful to complement it because I want to make sense. Like, how are they making sense of it, right? How are they making sense of threats to democracy or democracy itself? So yeah, also a good point. Only good points today.
Do we have, yeah, Julia.
Hi, and thank you very much for your presentation. I was wondering, I saw that you put sectorial variation as a criteria for the selection of the case studies among worker cooperatives. Do you have any expectation, any hypothesis on how worker cooperatives behave in different sectors?
Yeah, so I was thinking with the sectorial variation, I want to minimize you know, because the focus is more on the movements, on the collective movement, rather than the immediate competitive environment of these organizations. So I want to, through having sectorial variation, I ensure that, okay, maybe I only research worker cooperatives in the industry sector, and obviously they have to be way more competitive than worker cooperatives in the cultural sector where they have a coffee or something like that, you know. So I wanted to isolate that a little bit. At least there was my rationale behind it. And so with regard to your question, yeah, I definitely think there is a sectorial influence on it. Yeah, absolutely. As well as there is an influence on the type of cooperative you're in. So depending on the type, you have different types of property rights, right? And you are differently exposed to to the market. I mean, you know, so the relation to your competitors is different. So in some sectors there might be more cooperative in that way, right? So for instance, the cultural sector, but I think in highly industrialized sectors, or it might be very different. Yeah. Does that answer the question? But yeah, that's also a point I was thinking a lot about. So how do I figure out to, you know, I don't want to say isolate, but to narrow in the phenomenon somehow, to minimize other influences on the interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, our snack break is almost over. I don't know if there are any more questions. Otherwise, I believe that's the end of our cooperative snack break. Thank you all for joining, and thank you very much, Adrian, for sharing your project with us. I will let me remind you that next COP snack break is going to be on the 14th of January at 2 p.m. Central European Time. And David Forgerini will talk about cooperatives and SDGs, but the working language will be Spanish next time. So again, most of us are part of the Young and Emerging Scholar Networks on Cooperative Studies of the ICA-CCR. If you want to join us, please visit the website ccr.ica.coop or visit our LinkedIn group and write us an email, and you can join us in our future events. So until next time, take care and stay cooperative. Bye.
Thank you. And I
Thanks,
hope that
everyone.
maybe I can present the results of my research in maybe half a year or something like that in another break, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're all eager to listen to you.
Thank you very much.